In the heart of Manhattan, where the skyline sparkles like a field of diamonds, Ethan Montgomery stands as a titan of industry, a ruthless billionaire with no room for weakness. As his private helicopter lands on the rooftop of Montgomery Enterprises, the tension in the air is palpable. Inside the sleek boardroom, 12 terrified executives sit in silence, their faces drained of color, awaiting their fate. With a chilling calm, Ethan's voice cuts through the room like ice. "You're all fired." There's no emotion, no hesitation, just a cold, calculated decision. His wealth, power, and unyielding drive are personified by the $50,000 watch gleaming on his wrist, an unspoken reminder of his dominance over the business world. Mediocrity is his enemy, and he won't tolerate it. But as his empire expands, someone is about to challenge everything he believes. Ethan Montgomery's world is one of power, control, and fear, until fate leads him down an unexpected path. The man who commands boardrooms with a glance and fires without a second thought is about to face a force far more unpredictable. Love. Will his unbreakable resolve be enough to keep him from changing? Or will a simple baker from the heart of the city show him that even the hardest hearts can be softened? While the world of Ethan Montgomery is defined by cold, calculated business deals and the weight of power, Emily Bennett's life couldn't be more different. Nestled in a cozy corner of Manhattan, her bakery, Sweet Beginnings, stands as a beacon of warmth and kindness in a city that often feels unforgiving. The scent of freshly baked bread, cakes, and pastries fills the air, offering a small but heartfelt escape for those who visit. Emily is the heart and soul of her bakery, working tirelessly behind the counter with a genuine passion for what she does. Every loaf of bread, every cupcake, every delicate pastry is made with love, and it shows in every bite. However, despite the joy her work brings, Emily faces challenges that would deter most. Her bakery is small, and her oven, an ancient relic that has seen better days, often breaks down at the most inconvenient times. This particular day is no different. With an important charity event on the horizon, Emily finds herself elbow-deep in flour, trying to coax her temperamental oven, fondly named Bertha, back to life. The oven sputters and hisses, barely managing to keep up with the orders. Still, Emily refuses to give up. She has always prided herself on perseverance, even in the face of adversity. She kicks the oven lightly, hoping for one last batch to make it through. "Come on, Bertha," she mutters under her breath, her voice filled with a quiet determination. Emily's resilience is not just limited to her work. In fact, it's a defining feature of her character. Her life has not been easy, but she meets every hardship with an unwavering optimism that seems to defy logic. She isn't just baking for herself, she's baking for a purpose. Sweet Beginnings isn't merely a place where people come to satisfy their sweet tooth. It's a hub for the community, a safe space where people can come together, share stories, and find comfort in the simplest of things, a freshly baked muffin or a warm cup of coffee. She's always looking for ways to help others, and she pours her heart into every charity event, using her baking as a means to give back. While other people might see her bakery as just a business, Emily sees it as a way to make a positive impact on the world around her. The joy of baking for others fills her heart, and she finds meaning in the smiles she brings to people's faces. Despite her best efforts, there are days when the weight of running a small business gets to be too much. Her oven may be on the fritz, and the bills may pile up, but Emily refuses to let those things define her. Instead, she chooses to focus on what she can control: the love she pours into every product she creates, and the connection she fosters with those around her. Even on the toughest days, she never lets her passion for baking falter. Emily's approach to life contrasts starkly with Ethan's cold, business-driven mentality. She values human connection, empathy, and the simple joys of life. She sees each person who walks into Sweet Beginnings not as a customer, but as a friend. Whether it's helping a neighbor with a batch of cookies or offering a free cupcake to a struggling family, Emily's kindness and generosity know no bounds. She believes in the power of food to heal, to connect, and to uplift others. Through all the challenges she faces, Emily remains grounded in her mission to bring joy, one cupcake at a time. And while her life may seem small compared to the grandeur of Ethan's empire, it is rich in love, community, and purpose. Things that, as we soon discover, cannot be measured in dollars and cents. Her bakery may be humble, but her heart is enormous. And it's exactly that warmth and generosity that will eventually catch the eye of someone who has spent his life surrounding himself with nothing but power and wealth. for all the walls Ethan has built around himself. Emily's simple, authentic approach to life will be the catalyst for a transformation he never saw coming. After a particularly grueling phone call from the board of Montgomery Enterprises, Ethan Montgomery's mind was a whirlwind of numbers, mergers, and market analysis. The Tokyo market was crashing, and he had just lost another multi-million-dollar deal. His usual calm demeanor was a front masking the frustration that gnawed at him. He needed a break, a moment of escape from the unrelenting world of power profit and high-stakes deals. It was on a whim that he found himself in front of Sweet Beginnings Emily Bennett's humble bakery, a place that had never crossed his mind before, but now seemed like an odd refuge. He stepped out of his sleek black Rolls-Royce, adjusting the cuffs of his designer suit as he walked toward the door. His mood was far from pleasant, but he hoped a quick cup of coffee might provide some comfort, just enough to steady his nerves before the next round of stressful decisions. As he pushed the door open, the bell chimed with an almost cheerful sound, and he was met by the familiar scent of freshly baked goods, though the warm atmosphere felt at odds with the cold storm raging in his mind. Inside the bakery was a stark contrast to the corporate world he inhabited. The cozy space was decorated with small touches of personality, like mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu filled with daily specials. The gentle hum of a vintage radio added to the feeling of simplicity, a far cry from the sterile, high-pressure environment of his office. But the moment he stepped in, he was greeted not by the bustling energy of business, but by a soft, calm presence behind the counter. Emily. She looked up from her work, her flour-dusted cheeks framing a bright, genuine smile, her eyes warm and welcoming locked with his. But there was no immediate rush to please him or cater to his whims, a stark contrast to the ever-obsequious responses he was used to. Instead, her gaze held a calm certainty, as if she wasn't fazed by the towering figure standing in her bakery. "I'm sorry, sir," Emily said politely, her voice steady but warm, "but we're actually closed right now. It's the end of the day." Ethan's brow furrowed as his irritation flared. "I don't care if you're closed. I want coffee black now." He stood at the counter, his tone, sharp eyes fixed on her with the same intensity he applied when negotiating billion-dollar deals. In his world, demands were met without question. His words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with expectation, yet Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she offered a soft, almost amused smile and shook her head. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. We close at 6:00 and the coffee machine is already off. But if you're interested, I have some day-old muffins. They're not fresh, but they're still good." Her calm refusal, coupled with her cheerfulness, threw Ethan off balance. It was rare for anyone to turn down his requests, let alone someone in a position of such simplicity. For a moment he was caught between his business instinct to press on and a curious sense of unease that started to churn within him. Emily's easygoing nature stood in stark contrast to the world he dominated, one built on control power and the ability to manipulate any situation. Yet here was this woman who seemed neither intimidated nor eager to please him. There was no rush to cater to his demands, no fawning over his wealth or position. She simply stated her boundaries and moved on with a sense of peace, as if her world didn't revolve around pleasing the likes of him. For a brief moment, Ethan looked at her with a flicker of surprise, a feeling that was foreign to him. He had expected her to crumble under the weight of his presence, to offer him whatever he wanted. But instead, she stood there unbothered and unaffected. Her kindness wasn't transactional. It was genuine. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the brief vulnerability that had snuck up on him. "Fine," he muttered, turning to leave. But then he paused. There was something about her warmth that had caught his attention. He glanced back over his shoulder at Emily, who had already returned to her baking, humming softly to herself, as if nothing had happened. She seemed entirely unfazed by his presence. In that fleeting moment, Ethan's thoughts shifted. The urgency of his phone calls, the pressures of his business, the constant demands of his world. It all seemed so distant, so insignificant in the face of Emily's effortless composure and warmth. There was something almost disorienting about the way she existed in the world, untouched by the chaos he lived in. Before he could dwell too long on the thoughts racing through his mind, his phone rang again, snapping him back into reality. "What do you mean the merger fell through?" He snapped into the phone, his usual harsh tone returning. As he stormed out of the bakery, he couldn't shake the image of Emily's smile from his mind. The soft, unspoken defiance in her refusal had lingered with him, and for the first time in years, Ethan Montgomery found himself uncertain about something. As his car pulled away, he couldn't resist glancing back at the bakery one last time. He saw Emily through the window, still going about her work, oblivious to the man whose empire spanned across continents. Ethan Montgomery. The man who made CEOs tremble couldn't help but wonder. Could this woman with her simple, unassuming life have something he didn't even know he was missing? And as the bakery faded from view, a part of him, a part he hadn't known existed, was left behind, lingering in the warmth of Emily's world. Later that evening, as Emily was locking up Sweet Beginnings for the night, she made her way around the small bakery, turning off lights and checking that everything was in its place. She had just finished clearing the counter when something caught her eye, an envelope neatly folded sitting atop the register. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly, wondering who could have left something behind. She reached for it, noticing it was a crisp $100 bill carefully placed with the envelope, as if the money itself was a part of the note. Opening the envelope, Emily was met with a short, almost comical note in neat handwriting. "For the coffee I didn't get." She blinked in surprise, reading the note again. Her first reaction was a burst of laughter. The audacity of this man, Ethan Montgomery, the billionaire who had walked in demanding coffee only to be refused by her after her bakery had already closed, and now he was leaving her a $100 bill, as if it could somehow make up for the fact that he had been dismissed so casually. She couldn't help herself. The absurdity of it all made her smile. Emily folded the note back up and tucked it inside her pocket, eyeing the bill for a moment longer. She thought about how out of touch the world of the wealthy could sometimes be. In their minds, money could solve everything, even the smallest of inconveniences. And yet here he was, offering her money for something as trivial as a cup of coffee she hadn't even served. She glanced at the charity donation jar sitting by the counter where she had been collecting spare change for the past few months to help local shelters. A mischievous thought crossed her mind. "Well, if he insists on compensating me for his coffee, I know exactly where this will go," she muttered to herself, her lips curling into a grin. Without hesitation, she dropped the $100 bill into the jar. She felt a warm sense of satisfaction as she watched it settle among the other coins and bills. Emily shook her head, chuckling softly to herself. "Rich people are so weird," she muttered, still amused by the whole interaction. In the back of her mind, she knew she was making a small, almost playful jab at the oddity of the gesture, but she couldn't deny that it had given her a story to tell. Emily wasn't one to be impressed by wealth. The bakery wasn't about chasing after money. It was about serving the community, sharing joy through food, and most importantly, living authentically. She found humor in the idea that someone as wealthy and powerful as Ethan Montgomery would have to resort to a $100 bill to make up for something as trivial as coffee. To her, it was a reflection of how detached some people could become from the real world, where small gestures of kindness and respect meant far more than a handful of bills. As she finished cleaning up the kitchen, Emily couldn't help but wonder about the man who had left the money. He was obviously used to getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. She had seen men like him before, in their fancy suits and polished shoes, always running the show, never bothering to think about the little people. And yet there was something different about him, something she hadn't quite figured out. The way he had looked at her. His hard, steely eyes, softened by something she couldn't quite put her finger on, left her feeling strangely curious. But just as quickly as that thought came, she pushed it aside. She had a life to live, a bakery to run, and a community to serve. She didn't have time to overthink the actions of some high-powered businessman who couldn't even take no for an answer. The next morning, as Emily prepared for another busy day, she found herself inexplicably thinking of Ethan again. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. It wasn't as if she had time for distractions, and yet the memory of his visit, of his strange request for coffee, and of the note with the $100 bill seemed to linger in the back of her mind like an unanswered question. It was only a small moment in time, just one more encounter in a world filled with customers, deadlines, and charity events. But somehow it had made an impression on her. Little did she know that it was a moment that would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she knew about herself and about the world she had built in her small bakery. As she flipped the open sign on the door that morning and prepared for another day of baking, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this would not be the last time she crossed paths with Ethan Montgomery. It was a strange thought considering how little they had really exchanged, but something about the note and the money felt like a beginning of sorts. Something that would soon lead her into a world much bigger than the cozy bakery she had spent years cultivating. The next morning, after a night of restless sleep spent overthinking his interactions with Emily, Bennett Ethan Montgomery found himself inexplicably driving past Sweet Beginnings again. It was a detour. Of course he was on his way to another high-stakes meeting, but his mind wandered, as it had all morning, to the simple and unexpected encounter he'd had at the bakery the day before. As he neared the bakery, Ethan's usual brisk pace slowed. He didn't mean to glance at the little shop, but his eyes betrayed him. His driver, Thomas, had already noticed his subtle shift in attention. "Shall we turn left?" Sir Thomas asked, his tone neutral, though it was clear he had sensed his boss's unusual interest. "No," Ethan muttered, his voice cutting through the quiet of the car. "Just keep going straight." He wasn't sure why he cared, but there was something about Emily that intrigued him. Her unbothered attitude, the way she had dismissed his demands for coffee so effortlessly, and that warm, genuine smile she had offered him without expecting anything in return. He hadn't been able to shake the image of her from his mind, and the curiosity gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. As his car came closer to the bakery, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Through the window, he could just make out a figure moving inside the bakery. It was Emily, and she wasn't baking or working behind the counter. Instead, she was holding a mop, dancing around the room as if no one were watching. Her movements were carefree, her shoulders swaying to some invisible rhythm, a broad grin plastered across her face. She sang to herself in a low hum, so absorbed in the simple joy of the moment that she didn't even notice the luxury car creeping by. For a moment time seemed to stop. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, watching her carefree spirit, with something he couldn't quite place. A strange warmth stirred within him. It was an odd feeling, one he hadn't experienced in years, and it caught him completely off guard. In his world, there was no room for such things. He didn't dance with mops. He didn't sing to the sound of his own voice in the middle of a workday. He commanded boardrooms, crushed opponents in ruthless negotiations, and prided himself on controlling every aspect of his life. Spontaneity had no place in his world. And yet here was Emily dancing and singing in the middle of her bakery, creating a space where joy seemed to exist effortlessly. It was impossible not to be struck by the stark contrast between their worlds. His initial impulse was to look away, to tell Thomas to keep driving. He had a schedule, after all, a mountain of decisions to make, and his time was precious. But as they drove past the bakery, his eyes remained fixed on the window, watching Emily twirl and laugh like she had nothing to worry about. And for a fleeting moment, Ethan felt something stir in him, a spark of something softer, something human that he had long since buried beneath his polished corporate persona. As the bakery disappeared from view, Ethan realized with a sense of surprise that his thoughts were still on her. He hadn't planned to return to the bakery, and certainly hadn't expected to feel this strange pull to the woman who had in less than 24 hours somehow managed to crack the icy armor he had built around himself. "Should I take you to the meeting?" Sir Thomas's voice interrupted his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. Ethan gave a slight nod. "Yes. But drive slowly. I'm not in a rush." For the rest of the drive, he couldn't stop thinking about the way Emily had danced with that mop, the way her joy seemed so authentic, so free of any calculation. It was a sharp contrast to his life, his endless pursuit of power, money, and success. Ethan had spent years constructing a world in which every detail was controlled, every move deliberate, and yet watching her so utterly content in the chaos of her humble bakery made him question what he had sacrificed in his own quest for perfection. As he entered the towering skyscraper of Montgomery Enterprises later that morning, the weight of his duties immediately settled back onto his shoulders. But even as his assistants rushed to brief him on the day's agenda, his thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. Her smile, the warmth in her eyes, the way she had simply turned down his request for coffee as though there was no power or prestige in the world that could make her change her mind. It was a power that he found intriguing. There was something disarming about Emily's approach to life. No games, no ulterior motives, just an openness and authenticity that he hadn't encountered in years. In a world where everyone seemed to have a hidden agenda, Emily's simplicity and genuine kindness were like a breath of fresh air. Before he could fully compose himself, the phone rang on his desk. It was Marcus, his assistant, calling to remind him of the 10:00 a.m. meeting with his financial advisors. Ethan barely heard him. His mind was still replaying the scene at the bakery. "Cancel the 10:00 meeting," he said abruptly, surprising even himself with the decisiveness in his voice. Sir Marcus asked, clearly confused. "The meeting with the advisors is crucial. I'll deal with it later." Ethan muttered, his mind still somewhere far from the world of mergers and market shares. "I have other things to focus on," as he stood by the window looking down at the bustling city below. The strange feeling from that morning returned. It wasn't just a passing curiosity, it was something deeper, something more profound that he couldn't quite put into words. He didn't know why, but Emily Bennett had managed to get under his skin in a way no one else ever had. And for the first time in years, Ethan wondered if there was more to life than the cold, unyielding empire he had built. The following afternoon, as Ethan sat in his glass-walled office, the weight of his day seemed to press on him. The pressure from the board of directors, the endless phone calls, and the mountain of decisions that needed to be made felt heavier than ever. Yet his mind kept drifting back to one thing: Emily. Her warm smile, her laughter, the way she had simply turned down his coffee order. It was all so unexpected. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he found himself wanting to know more. With a sigh, Ethan picked up his phone, dialing the number. He had an idea, and for reasons he couldn't fully understand, it seemed like the perfect time to act on it. He needed something, an excuse to see her again, to have another interaction with the woman who had somehow managed to break through the walls he had so carefully constructed. The phone rang a few times before Emily's cheerful voice answered. "Emily speaking. How can I help you?" Ethan's voice came through surprisingly soft for someone used to giving orders. "This is Ethan Montgomery. I'd like to place an order for 500 cupcakes to be delivered to my office tomorrow for a board meeting." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a hesitant laugh. 500 cupcakes. Huh. That's quite the order, Mr. Montgomery. Are you sure you're not confusing this bakery with one of those corporate cake factories? "I'm quite sure," Ethan replied, his tone firm. "My team needs them, and I expect them to be ready by tomorrow." Emily's voice changed slightly, her usual cheerfulness replaced by a touch of concern. "Well, I'd love to help, but there's a problem. My oven's been on the fritz for a while now, and it's barely keeping up with my regular orders. 500 cupcakes, that's just not possible right now." Ethan's brows furrowed. Impossible was a word that didn't sit well with him. It was a word he didn't often hear, not from people in his world. But this wasn't just any person. This was Emily. And for reasons he couldn't explain, her refusal didn't frustrate him the way he thought it would. Instead, it piqued his curiosity. "Emily," he said, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "I'm not used to hearing no, especially when it comes to me." Emily, however, wasn't intimidated. There was a beat of silence before she responded, her voice calm and steady. "Well, Ethan, I'm not in the habit of promising what I can't deliver. You'll just have to accept that 500 cupcakes aren't happening right now. Not unless you want me to bake them on the floor of my bakery with a broken oven." Her tone was matter-of-fact, almost teasing, but there was no hint of submission in her words. Ethan for once found himself taken aback. No one spoke to him this way. Not in his world. People either obeyed or suffered the consequences. Yet here was Emily Bennett with her unassuming little bakery standing her ground. And what's more, she was doing it with a certain lightness, as though refusing his request was the most natural thing in the world. A brief chuckle escaped him before he could stop it. "All right, Emily. I respect your honesty," he said after a moment of silence. "But you're still going to bake those cupcakes for me. You just need a little help." "What do you mean, help?" Emily asked, sounding both curious and skeptical. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Ethan said with a note of finality in his voice. "And when I get there, we're going to figure this out together. You're going to bake those 500 cupcakes, and I'll make sure your oven gets the upgrade it deserves. No more excuses." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a soft, almost amused sigh. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Dead serious," he replied, and with that, he ended the call. Emily stood there for a moment, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this. Of course, she knew Ethan Montgomery was persistent. He was a billionaire after all, accustomed to getting his way. But this was something else entirely. She had expected him to try to push her, to pressure her into accepting the impossible. Instead, he had made an offer that she didn't know how to refuse. And then there was the promise of fixing her oven, a gesture that seemed too grand to be genuine. "All right, then," she muttered to herself. "Let's see what this corporate raider is made of." Within half an hour, the roar of a luxury car pulling up outside Sweet Beginnings signaled Ethan's arrival. His driver Thomas opened the door, and out stepped the man who had dominated boardrooms and stock exchanges with his steely presence. But today, there was something different about him. His expensive suit was creased, as if he had made an effort to show up not as a billionaire, but as someone willing to get his hands dirty. The door jingled as he entered the bakery, and Emily, standing behind the counter, couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "Ready to get your hands dirty, Mr. Montgomery?" she asked, her voice tinged with amusement. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. This wasn't a boardroom. There were no charts, no figures, no high-stakes decisions. Just Emily standing behind her counter, her apron covered in flour with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I'm here to help you bake." "Ethan," said his voice, uncharacteristically soft, and his usual cold demeanor replaced with something more human. Emily laughed, a sound that made Ethan feel strangely at ease. "Then, Mr. Montgomery, you might want to grab an apron. This is going to get messy." As Ethan entered Sweet Beginnings, the warmth of the bakery hit him like a wave. The smell of fresh dough and sugar mingled in the air, an almost welcoming contrast to the cold, clinical atmosphere of his office. Emily was already at the counter, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron, looking entirely at ease in a place that felt far removed from his world of high-rise buildings and corporate takeovers. Ethan felt out of place, a feeling he was not used to. But he squared his shoulders and approached her with the determination that had served him so well in business. "All right, Emily. I'm here. Let's bake these cupcakes." Emily, who had been humming to herself, didn't even look up immediately. When she did, the surprise on her face was evident, quickly followed by a smile that seemed to brighten the entire room. She crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow, as if assessing her unexpected guest. Well, if it isn't Mr. Montgomery, the corporate raider himself, ready to trade his boardroom for my kitchen. Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" Ethan gave a half-smile, his usual composure slightly shaken. "I've negotiated billion-dollar deals. How hard can baking be?" He said the words with the kind of confidence that normally made people bow to him, but Emily wasn't impressed. She chuckled softly, not even hiding the amusement in her eyes. "I'm sure you're used to controlling the board, but in here it's a whole different ballgame. You might want to prepare yourself." Mr. Montgomery, Emily handed him an apron with a flourish, and Ethan looked down at it with mild confusion. The apron was bright pink, decorated with large, cartoonish unicorns that looked as if they had just escaped from a child's birthday party. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if she was playing some kind of joke. But as he caught her eye, seeing the genuine humor in her expression, he realized she wasn't going to let him off easy. Reluctantly, he tied the apron around his waist. His expensive suit, which had been pristine just moments ago, now looked slightly ridiculous with the childish pink fabric dangling below. Emily, who had been trying to hold back a laugh, didn't succeed any longer. "You're a sight in that, Mr. Montgomery," she teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Instead of responding with irritation as he might have in any other situation, Ethan found himself laughing. The sound was unexpected and foreign to him, like a chord struck in a key he had forgotten existed. "I suppose I'm more used to a boardroom, not a bakery," he admitted, the words slipping out without his usual sharpness. "First time in the kitchen." "Huh?" Emily asked, her voice laced with playfulness. He nodded. "I've been known to stick to what I'm good at. But today I'm going to learn, and learn." He did, though, not in the way he'd expected. Ethan carefully approached the mixing bowl, holding the whisk like it was some sort of foreign weapon. He hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, until Emily stepped in and guided him. "You're holding it wrong," she said gently, reaching over to adjust his grip. The closeness of her touch made his breath hitch, but he quickly shoved the sensation aside. "Like this," Emily continued, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. She moved with the ease of someone who had done this thousands of times before, while Ethan fumbled with the ingredients, splattering flour and batter everywhere. Within moments, the kitchen was covered in a fine layer of cake mix, much of it adorning Ethan's suit and his now comically misplaced unicorn apron. Emily's laughter rang through the kitchen as she wiped a bit of frosting from his cheek. "You're supposed to fold the ingredients, not declare war on them," she teased, her tone light. And teasing Ethan felt the heat of embarrassment rise to his cheeks. But instead of retreating, he laughed along with her. For the first time in years, he felt something other than the constant pressure of work and power. It was strange, liberating even to be doing something so simple, so human. He watched as Emily worked effortlessly, and for a brief moment he envied her ability to find joy in the smallest things, things he had long forgotten to appreciate. Hours passed, and Ethan, despite making a complete mess of the kitchen, found himself enjoying the chaos. Emily's easygoing nature had broken down the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself, and he was no longer the billionaire CEO. He was just a man baking cupcakes and laughing with a woman who seemed to see him for something more than his wealth and status. As the final batch of cupcakes was ready to be frosted, Ethan found himself reluctant to leave. His initial intention to simply fulfill the order had turned into something more. It was no longer about cupcakes or business. It was about connecting with something outside of his usual world. Something real. "Same time tomorrow?" Ethan asked, his voice a little softer than usual, an almost hopeful tone in his words. Emily raised an eyebrow, her grin widening. "Don't you have an empire to run? They can wait," he replied with surprising sincerity. Surprising even himself with how little he minded. In that moment, something had shifted in Ethan Montgomery. Something he couldn't quite explain. But as he left Sweet Beginnings that day with flour in his hair and a newfound lightness in his step, he realized he hadn't felt this human in years. As the hours passed and the final batch of cupcakes slowly came together, Ethan found himself absorbed in the rhythm of the kitchen. The work was simple, almost meditative, and the feeling of flour on his hands and batter on his face was an odd form of relief. He wasn't worried about the next merger or the stock market's volatile swings here in the warmth of Sweet Beginnings. None of that mattered. Emily worked beside him, her focus entirely on the task at hand. But every so often she would glance over at him, offering a teasing remark or a helpful suggestion on how to properly pipe frosting onto the cupcakes. As she worked, Ethan began to feel a strange sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. But it was in the midst of this simplicity that Emily began to speak of something far bigger than cupcakes. "You know," Emily said, looking up from the counter as she gently mixed the ingredients, "I've been dreaming of something more for Sweet Beginnings. More than just a bakery." Ethan paused, wiping frosting off his hands. Curiosity piqued. "More like what?" She smiled, a spark of excitement lighting her eyes. "I want to turn this place into a community center. A place where kids can come in and learn how to bake. Not just for fun, but to teach them skills, build their confidence, and give them something they can be proud of." She gestured to the bakery, the warmth and energy she had created here. "I want to teach them that they can create something from nothing, that they can make something beautiful with their own hands. I think that would be a good place to start." For a moment, the weight of her words hung in the air. Ethan was struck by how much bigger her dream was than anything he had ever imagined for himself. Here he was, a billionaire who had built his empire with ruthless precision. Yet the simplicity of Emily's dream felt infinitely more meaningful. She didn't want to just bake. It was about creating something that could change lives. "I think it's a wonderful idea," Ethan said, leaning against the counter as he considered her words. I could help. I could help you expand this, bring in the resources, the funding, whatever you need to make it happen." Emily paused, looking at him for a long moment. "I appreciate that, Ethan. But that's not what this is about." Her tone was gentle but firm, and the warmth in her eyes told him she wasn't saying it out of pride or stubbornness. "Some things can't be bought no matter how much money you have." Ethan felt a small pang of discomfort, something he wasn't accustomed to. "What do you mean?" Emily's smile softened as she set the piping bag down and walked over to him. "Trust, respect, a place in people's hearts. You can't just throw money at things and expect them to work. Not everything can be bought no matter how much you think it can be. These kids won't learn from someone who simply throws money at them." They'll learn from the people who care, who take the time to teach them, who show them that their dreams matter. Her words hit harder than he expected. For years, Ethan had relied on his wealth to move mountains. Money had been his tool to shape the world around him, to control people, to get what he wanted. But Emily's words were a stark reminder that there were things far more valuable than wealth, things that money couldn't buy. I've seen it before. Emily continued, her voice becoming more earnest. People with money think they can fix everything by writing a check, but those kids, they need more than just that. They need someone who believes in them, who sees them for who they are, not what they can do for someone else. If you want to help, really help, it's not about throwing money at the problem. It's about giving a piece of yourself. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt a shift. He had always believed that the world was transactional, that people could be bought, that everything had a price. But standing there in the warm kitchen of Sweet Beginnings, he realized that Emily was right. Some things could never be bought. Respect, trust, and genuine connection. They weren't commodities. I see what you're saying, Ethan said quietly, his voice more thoughtful than usual. He looked at Emily, seeing her, not just as the woman who had challenged him in the kitchen, but as someone with a vision, a purpose beyond the day-to-day grind of survival and success. I've spent my whole life thinking that I could control everything with money. But you're telling me that some things are just out of reach. Emily nodded, a hint of pride in her smile. Exactly. It's not always about what you can do with your wallet. Sometimes it's about what you're willing to invest in people, not just with money, but with your time, your care, and your heart. As they finished decorating the last of the cupcakes, Ethan felt a quiet realization settle inside him. It wasn't just the cupcakes that were being baked here today. It was something far deeper. Something that for the first time in years made him question everything he thought he knew about success. And for the first time he felt the stirrings of something else. A genuine desire to be a part of something bigger than himself. Not through power or wealth, but through real connection. Maybe Emily Bennett had taught him that the richest thing in life wasn't found in a bank account. It was found in the relationships we build, the trust we earn, and the respect we give. In the days that followed his time at Sweet Beginnings, Ethan Montgomery found himself undergoing a transformation that left even him astonished. It started with something small, an unexpected change in his routine. For years, Ethan had been the epitome of punctuality, the kind of man who arrived early, left late, and always maintained a cold, unflinching demeanor. But now, every morning as he stepped into his penthouse, he found himself lingering longer than usual, almost reluctant to face the sharp world he had built. His once perfect, sleek image, sharp suits, expensive watches, was slowly replaced with something different. One morning he arrived at the office late, his usual impeccable look disrupted by something foreign flower in his hair. The once pristine suit was now slightly creased, and his tie was loosely fastened. A far cry from the polished appearance that used to define him. His assistant Marcus was visibly surprised when Ethan walked into the lobby, humming softly to himself, a melody he couldn't quite place but couldn't shake. "Good morning, sir," Marcus said, hesitantly trying to mask his confusion. Ethan merely nodded, giving him a small smile, a gesture he hadn't used in years. He wasn't sure what had happened to him, how a few hours of baking cupcakes had turned his world upside down, but he found himself in no rush to return to the rigid, emotionless CEO that he had been for so long. The fast-paced, high-stakes world of mergers and acquisitions seemed for the first time less important than the connections he had been neglecting for so many years. His employees noticed the shift too. Where Ethan had once been demanding and critical, now there was a subtle change in his approach. He started taking the time to listen more than talk, asking his team how they were doing, taking a genuine interest in their lives outside of the office. His usual cold, calculating attitude was replaced by a more compassionate, thoughtful approach. At a weekly meeting, his CFO Harrison looked at him with a mixture of surprise and confusion as Ethan casually asked how his family was doing, something he had never bothered to inquire about before. The room fell silent for a moment, the executives exchanging glances, wondering what had come over their CEO. "It's nothing," Ethan said with a shrug, but there was a lightness to his voice that hadn't been there before. Just wanted to know how you're all holding up. The change was undeniable, where once there was an air of intimidation whenever Ethan walked into a room. Now there was a surprising warmth that began to spread across the office. His team, unsure of how to react, at first slowly adapted to the new atmosphere. They were no longer walking on eggshells waiting for the next sharp remark or dismissive gesture. Instead, they found themselves laughing at Ethan's dry jokes, chatting with him during lunch breaks, and even sharing personal stories that had never been part of their professional lives before. As the days passed, Ethan realized he was not only altering his interactions with his employees, but also with himself. He wasn't the same man who had been obsessed with power, wealth, and status. Something deeper was shifting. He was beginning to value human connection over profits, relationships over transactions. The change was subtle, but profound. Ethan Montgomery had always been a man of precision and control, but in the past week he had learned the power of letting go, of allowing himself to experience joy, vulnerability, and even laughter. And for the first time in his life, he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was more to success than simply being the wealthiest man in the room. As Ethan continued to embrace his newfound perspective, he began to realize something that had eluded him for most of his life. Emotional intelligence, kindness, and genuine human connection weren't just luxuries, they were essential components of a successful business. His interactions with his employees, once solely focused on numbers and efficiency, had shifted to something more holistic. He found that by fostering a supportive and empathetic work environment, his team was more engaged, more motivated, and surprisingly more productive. The atmosphere at Montgomery Enterprises was starting to feel less like a corporate war zone, and more like a place where people could thrive both professionally and personally. It wasn't just his employees who had noticed the change. His board of directors had too. At first, they seemed skeptical of his transformation, but over time their concerns grew louder. They began to question his shift in priorities, his focus on building relationships, and his casual attitude toward business decisions. They feared that his more compassionate, people-first approach was undermining the company's profitability and competitiveness. One afternoon, as the board gathered in the sleek conference room, the tension in the air was palpable. Ethan could sense the underlying hostility from the moment he entered. His CFO, Harrison, was the first to speak up, his voice laced with disapproval. "Ethan, we've been patient, but this focus on feel-good tactics, this is not how we built this company. We're here to make money, not to coddle people." The rest of the board nodded in agreement, their stern faces betraying their frustration. They had never understood his change, and they clearly saw it as a threat to their bottom line. Ethan stood up, his posture calm but resolute. He had heard enough. His mind was made up. "I've spent my whole life chasing profits, expanding our holdings, and increasing shareholder value," he said, his voice unwavering. "But I've come to realize that there's something far more important than just financial success, happiness, connection, and emotional intelligence. These things can drive a business forward in ways that money alone never could." His words hung in the air, and for a moment the room was silent. The board members exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of how to react. But Ethan continued, his tone now firm and decisive. "I've made the decision to fire the entire board," he said, his voice carrying authority. "I value happiness, trust, and mutual respect over blind profitability. If you believe that people don't matter, if you think that success can only be measured by profit margins and stock prices, then I don't need you on this team." The shock was immediate. Harrison's face turned pale, and several of the board members sputtered in disbelief. "You can't be serious." One of them finally managed to say, "You can't fire us just because we disagree with you. We're the ones who've kept this company afloat." Ethan's expression softened, but his resolve remained. "I'm serious," he said quietly. "This company needs a new direction, one where we value people, emotions, and connection, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. I'm willing to lose it all for that." With that, Ethan left the room, his decision final. As he walked out of the boardroom, he felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifted from his shoulders. The path ahead would be difficult, but he knew it was the right one. His company, Montgomery Enterprises, was no longer just about power and profit. It was about creating a place where people could thrive, where kindness and understanding could fuel success. For the first time in years, Ethan felt that his business had a deeper purpose, and it was a purpose worth fighting for. As Ethan stood in front of Emily, The hum of the bakery around them seemed to fade away. The air was warm, filled with the comforting scent of freshly baked goods. But in that moment, everything else felt insignificant. He had spent his life surrounded by luxury and opulence, chasing after things he could buy, control, and dominate. Yet in front of Emily, he realized that the most meaningful things in life were far simpler things that couldn't be bought. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against something small and delicate. When he pulled it out, Emily's eyes widened in surprise. In his palm lay a silver cupcake charm, a simple yet perfect symbol of their journey together. One that had started in this very bakery, amidst flour frosting and laughter. Emily looked at him, her heart racing, her eyes soft with love and curiosity. Ethan, usually so composed, now felt vulnerable. His usual self-assurance replaced by the sincerity of this moment. He had spent so much of his life hiding behind wealth and status, but here in this humble space he found something more valuable. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "When I first walked into this bakery, I had no idea what I was looking for. I thought I had everything figured out. But you showed me that the best things in life aren't things at all. You taught me about love, kindness, and what really matters." Emily's lips parted, but she didn't interrupt. She was lost in the intensity of his words. "This charm," Ethan continued, holding it up for her to see, "represents where we began. A place of sweetness, of simplicity, and of honesty. I want to build my future with you, Emily. I want to keep creating, to keep building together." With a deep breath, he knelt in front of her, looking up at her with a tenderness that felt both foreign and familiar. "Will you marry me? Not because of what I have, but because of who we are together. Will you be my partner? My equal in everything?" Emily's heart swelled as she looked at him. She had never expected this. No grand diamonds, no elaborate displays, just this simple, heartfelt gesture that spoke volumes. A tear slipped down her cheek as she nodded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes." In that moment, the silver cupcake charm symbolized more than just their love. It was a reminder of the journey they had taken together, and the life they would build side by side. As the months passed, Emily and Ethan's relationship blossomed into something even more profound. Ethan, once a man driven solely by profit and power, found himself wholly invested in Emily's dream of turning Sweet Beginnings into a community center. With his resources and her vision, they began working together to bring the dream to life. It wasn't just about the expansion of the bakery. It was about creating a space where children could learn, grow, and find confidence through the art of baking. Ethan, who had once dismissed anything that wasn't tied to business, now found himself completely immersed in a different kind of fulfillment. Together, they redesigned the bakery to accommodate classrooms, workshops, and a cafe where people of all ages could come together. Emily's passion for helping others and creating a meaningful space had awakened something in Ethan, a deep desire to make a difference beyond his corporate empire. Their worlds, so different at first glance, now blended seamlessly. The sharp, calculated decisions of Ethan's corporate life meshed effortlessly with the warmth and authenticity of Emily's bakery. It was as if they had built a bridge between two distinct worlds, one of steel and suits, the other of flour and warmth, and found that together they were unstoppable. When it came time for their wedding, it felt only fitting that the ceremony would take place in the very place where their journey had begun. Sweet Beginnings. The humble bakery, once a small business with big dreams, now stood as a symbol of their shared journey of growth, love, and transformation. The venue was transformed into a beautiful, intimate space, with fairy lights twinkling above and the scent of freshly baked goods filling the air. It was a wedding that celebrated not just their love, but everything they had built together: the bakery, the community center, and the life they had created, blending two very different worlds into one beautiful reality. The ceremony was filled with laughter, tears, and moments that spoke to the heart of their story. As they exchanged vows, it was clear to everyone that Ethan and Emily had found something far more valuable than wealth or success. They had found true love, and together they would continue to build something that could change lives. Their wedding was a perfect reflection of their relationship, simple yet meaningful, full of joy, and the promise of a future built on love and shared dreams. The wedding was a celebration of love, transformation, and new beginnings. As the ceremony unfolded in the cozy, transformed bakery, Ethan stood before their friends and family, a far cry from the stoic, business-driven man he once was. He looked at Emily, her eyes sparkling with joy, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had shared. With a soft smile, Ethan began his speech, his voice steady, but full of emotion. "When I first walked into Sweet Beginnings, I never imagined that a simple bakery could change everything about my life. I thought I had everything figured out. Wealth, power, control. But Emily, you've shown me something far more valuable: love, trust, and the power of emotional intelligence." He paused, looking at the crowd, then back at Emily, his heart full. "You taught me that people matter more than profits, that happiness cannot be bought, and that some of the most important things in life cannot be measured by numbers on a balance sheet. You've made me a better person, and for that I will be forever grateful." As the room filled with applause, Ethan smiled a genuine, heartfelt smile. He realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along: a life of purpose, a life of love, and a life filled with laughter and joy. This was no longer about business. It was about building a future with Emily side by side, where trust and emotional connection were the foundation of everything they did. Their wedding in the place where their journey had begun symbolized the merging of two worlds, his corporate empire and her humble bakery, into a shared life full of meaning. And as Ethan looked at Emily, he knew this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet. Montgomery Enterprises underwent a profound transformation, shedding its cold, profit-driven exterior and embracing a new philosophy centered on community and purpose. Under Ethan's leadership, the company shifted from a purely business-focused empire to a force for positive change. The Profit with Purpose initiative was born, a bold move to integrate emotional intelligence, empathy, and social responsibility into the company's operations. The initiative aimed not only to generate profits, but also to create lasting value for the community. Ethan encouraged his team to consider the impact of their decisions on people, not just the bottom line. The company began to invest in local programs, fund educational initiatives, and support charities that aligned with their values. Montgomery Enterprises became known for its commitment to social good, proving that financial success and emotional intelligence could coexist harmoniously. At every level, employees were encouraged to engage with the community, volunteer their time, and contribute to causes that mattered. The office culture shifted dramatically. What once was a high-pressure, competitive environment evolved into one where collaboration, kindness, and respect were prioritized. Ethan knew that real success wasn't just about numbers. It was about making a difference in people's lives. The results spoke for themselves. Not only did the company thrive financially, but it also became a beacon of corporate responsibility and a model for others to follow. The Profit with Purpose initiative demonstrated that businesses could still be successful while doing good, and in the process, Montgomery Enterprises earned not just profits, but the respect and admiration of its community. Ethan had found a new kind of wealth, one rooted in impact, connection, and purpose. The story of Ethan and Emily imparts a powerful lesson about the importance of emotional intelligence, human connection, and the value of purpose beyond profit. In a world often driven by financial success and status, it reminds us that true fulfillment comes from relationships, kindness, and making a positive impact on others. Ethan's transformation shows that it's never too late to change, and that embracing vulnerability and empathy can lead to deeper personal and professional growth. The shift in Montgomery Enterprises highlights that businesses can thrive while prioritizing community trust and emotional intelligence. For those of us in our 30s and beyond, balancing career goals with personal values can sometimes feel challenging. But this story teaches us that success isn't defined solely by wealth or titles. It's about contributing to something greater than ourselves and fostering meaningful connections. Whether in business relationships or everyday life, taking the time to listen, support, and act with integrity can create lasting positive change. We don't have to choose between success and doing good. We can have both. And that's the most valuable lesson of all.